Speedlight considerations. Some of you following along may be using Speedlights as your studio light source, or you may be considering using Speedlights in the future. You can definitely do that. But there are a few differences and some possible barriers you may have to consider. Power output. In most cases, a Speedlight will have a lot less power output than a strobe. There are some low power, inexpensive strobes, but for the most part, Speedlights are going to have less power. Typically, this isn't a problem because you can always bump up your ISO or open up your aperture to compensate. When the low power becomes a problem is when you're trying to use large modifiers and then also shoot at a small aperture, say f11. And this is what would happen with groups. Maybe you're using a big umbrella, which dissipates the light. It cuts a lot of power. And then you're also shooting at f11 to get more depth of field, which cuts even more light. What you need to do is either bring the light in closer, or this is a situation when you may need to double up on Speedlights to increase your power. I recommend testing your camera and figuring out what ISO you're also comfortable shooting at. So in that case, you may need to bump the ISO way up to allow you to shoot at f11 with a large modifier. Recycle time. Speaking of power output, when you're shooting at full power with a Speedlight, you may have very slow recycle times. And again, this is likely in a situation with a large modifier and you're wanting to shoot at greater depth of field, you need to shoot at full power. This would be particularly problematic if you're trying to shoot a subject with movement, but it's fine for most portraits and headshots. One other solution, if you don't want to shoot at full power because of the slow recycle times, is you can actually double up the Speedlights. If you double up the Speedlights, they don't need to be at full power to get as much output. Another thing you need to think about is your battery life. When you're shooting with Speedlights and using AA batteries, when they get depleted, the recycle times get even longer. This is a reason you might want to consider a battery pack if you're shooting a lot of Speedlights in the studio. I have this listed in the gear guide, or you can invest in some high quality rechargeable batteries. Filling modifiers. One of the things I never thought about when I was first using artificial light was the idea of filling my modifier. Basically, this is how it works. A Speedlight head, it's really small. And let's say you're lighting a big umbrella. Well, it's only filling up a small center of the umbrella, so the light won't be as soft as you want it to be. You actually want it wider to make more use of your light source. The small size of Speedlight is going to make this difficult. So one of the things you can do is actually manually zoom the Speedlight out so you're getting the widest spread of light possible to fill as much of the modifier as possible. Now also make sure that the Speedlight is in a position that gives it time to spread out. For example, with an umbrella, you don't want the Speedlight really close to the umbrella because the light's going to stay too concentrated. So do what you can to allow that light to spread out and fill your modifiers. So let's actually pop over and take a look at how this works. Now, the smaller the light source is relative to the subject, the harder the light. So what we do is we take that small head, that small Speedlight, and we point it into modifiers. We bounce it, we reflect it, we diffuse it, and what that does is it makes the light source larger. However, because the Speedlight head is so small in the front, a lot of times it actually doesn't really fill up the modifier. So what you're going to have in the case of an umbrella is you point that Speedlight back in there and it's only going to fill maybe a small part in the center, which means only that much light is actually bouncing up onto your subject, which means the light isn't actually that soft. So if you are using a Speedlight, there are a couple precautions that you want to take to make sure you're really using the size of that modifier. In the example of an umbrella, you want to make sure there's enough space between the head of that Speedlight and the back of the umbrella. If they're really close together, there's no time for that light to spread out. So if you look at the example that I have set up here, the rod of the umbrella, it's almost at the end, giving the light plenty of time to spread out. But the other thing you want to be careful of is the zoom of your Speedlight. Now, a lot of times what's going to happen is the zoom, depending on the trigger that you have set, it might actually be tied to the zoom of your lens. So for example, what actually happens is if I zoom to say 105 millimeters on my lens, the Speedlight actually zooms. What happens is it narrows the beam, and the reason it's doing that is if you're using a bare Speedlight and you're shooting something far away, you don't want to waste all that light. You don't want the light to spread everywhere. So the Speedlight actually narrows the beam. Well, that's not going to work if I'm bouncing into a modifier like I am here. Sure, I might be at 105 so that I can shoot that headshot, but what it's going to do is it's going to narrow the beam and only light just a tiny center of that umbrella, again, not using the whole size of it, not giving me soft enough light. Instead, what you want to do is actually purposely zoom that speed light out. You can zoom it out so the light fills up the umbrella. So we're gonna take a look so you can see how to do that. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to take a picture of the umbrella so you can see exactly where the light is spreading. This first shot, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to be shooting with the zoom at 105, presuming I'm shooting with my lens zoomed in. Take a look at how much of the umbrella it actually fills. So 105, let me point this way. I'll take a picture of the umbrella. All right. Oh man, yeah. So you see, out of that entire umbrella, it's only filling and hitting a tiny portion of it. It's not what I want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over to the speed light and manually zoom it out to the widest that will go. In the case of this speed light, that's 24 millimeters. So let's come over here. Great. All right, so let's take another picture, this time zoomed out to 24. All right. Yeah, I get a lot more use out of that umbrella. It fills up a much bigger area. But I actually know another trick. On the front of most speed lights, actually it's kind of tucked into the front, there is this little panel that you can pull out and flip down. And what it's actually doing, it's spreading the light out more. So that would be in the case of if you're using a bare speed light, right, pointed at somebody, and maybe you're using a wide angle lens, you actually need a greater spread of light to cover that whole area. Well, that's the purpose of that little panel. You pull it out, and what you'll see is on your speed light, it actually zooms it out even more than you can do manually. It's covering a greater area. So in the case of this speed light, it's going to take it from 24 millimeters of coverage to 14. So let me go pop out that panel. And I see it's already gone to 14 on the back of my speed light. Let me take one more shot, this time at 14 millimeters. And now I am using a much larger proportion of that umbrella, so the light's going to be even softer. So if you are working in the studio, make sure that as you're zooming in and you're changing your focal length, it's not also zooming in your speed light. Instead, what I do is I put it on manual zoom, and if I'm trying to fill a large umbrella or I'm trying to fill a softbox, I make sure that my speed light is zoomed out. Modeling light. One of the biggest challenges of using speed lights in the studio is the fact that it lacks a modeling light, because modeling lights are great to help you visualize the placement of your light, and you can see the quality of the light and where each highlight is before you ever take the photo. Now, if you become more familiar with lighting, you'll be able to rely less on the modeling lights, but honestly, I use them for every shoot that I do. Now, if you are using speed lights, I've got a little trick to help you out. If on your camera you hit the depth of field preview button, what it does is it triggers your speed lights and sets off a series of rapid fire flashes for about a second or so. Although this isn't a modeling light, it gives you a quick visualization of where the light is placed as well as the quality of that light. Modifiers. In the past, there were a lot more modifiers for strobes than for speed lights, but in recent years, a lot of companies have stepped up. Westcott, Photex, Expo Imaging, and Photix, and they've introduced everything from beauty dishes to softboxes to grids. And while they may not be exact equivalents, typically you can find some gear that will give you a similar effect. In the gear guide, I've recommended speedlight equivalents to modifiers. So as you make your way through the course, you can see what I recommend for you.